on social media, go ahead and use the hashtag xAPICohort, tag the xAPI Gnome or T-Learning. Again, this is web session 12. It's the final web session for the fall 2019 xAPI Learning Cohort. The next cohort starts in January. The signups are open, so you can go to xAPICohort.com, and on the right tab where it says Upcoming Cohort, that's where you can register for spring. We are closing out cohort with 650 folks registered for the fall 2019 cohort, and already have 42 folks registered for spring 2020, which is pretty exciting. Today we're going to have project team demos and talk a little bit about the xAPI party on the 13th of December. So if anyone on this web session who is a part of a project team wants to demo for December 13th, make sure you stay on the line so that we talk about that with you. Behind the mics today are myself, Jessica Jackson. I'm an instructional designer, and Jamie Washington is our global experience host. She's producing for us. Again, we're on our final day of project team demos. We have 5 teams signed up to demo their projects today. This is in this journey of where we are with the teams. We got to know xAPI and each other from weeks 1 to 3. We got into the details, started thinking about what types of projects we might be interested in, scoping out, assigning, and iterating, trying again, and then we started applying and thinking about next steps. So today is demonstration for where our teams are. With that, we're going to get started with our team demos, and up first is Team Alexa. So while I am switching over, I'm going to let Team Alexa start their presentation. You can go ahead and take over.
Thank you, Jessica. I am having Brian load up the PowerPoint or presentation for us. Thank you. So my name is Izzy Lara, and I am 1/3 of the Team Alexa team, along with Helena Smith and Brian Wanzer, who is our team lead. And our project had to do with tech support training, and we happened to use Alexa to do that. So our scenario was basically to help train users on how to be effective customer service representatives. The idea was that they would troubleshoot technical issues over the phone. With Alexa acting as the customer, Alexa would call in and say that, you know, my computer won't turn on, and then Alexa would promptly provide a couple of different possible responses for the user to choose from. Now, the user, as the customer support representative, would try to select the most appropriate of the 3 responses, and then that entire interaction was captured via xAPI and sent directly into the Watershed LRS. Previous cohorts that have used Alexa have used an intermediary application called Zapier to create the statements and send them into Watershed, but I was actually able to use go directly from the voice flow platform directly into the LRS, so without having to use Zapier at all. And then at the end of the entire interaction, Alexa is going to tell you how many interactions you got right, which really means actually how many times you selected the best or most appropriate answer. Now, what we actually did here, this was sort of the general idea, but we had to actually look for an existing sort of workflow. So an actual like flow chart of when somebody calls in and does, you know, and says that their computer won't boot, what are you supposed to do? What should you ask? What are the troubleshooting steps? So we actually found, Brian actually found this existing one from, Brian, can you go back one slide? This was from, there we go, the Community College of Rhode Island. Thank you. And what you can see on the flow chart is, I know it's a little bit hard to read because it's a little bit small, but it asks questions like, is the phone cord plugged in? Is the power cord plugged in? Power strip plugged in? Do you see the phrase invalid system disk, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, we just followed this flow and programmed it into voice flow. And there's a little bit of randomization in there as well. So Alexa won't always say that, yes, the power strip is plugged in. Sometimes she'll say no. And then there's sort of different workflows that go on from there. Can you go on to the next slide? So to summarize the process of the speech and capturing dialogue and sending xAPI, basically we have Alexa provide some sort of dialogue, like my computer won't turn on. Alexa then provides the options for the user to select from. We capture the user's intent. We set a couple of variables. And then finally we send the xAPI statement before moving on to the next voice interaction. And then if you go on to the next slide, I know this is a little bit hard to read, but it's a screenshot of what the statement looks like from the watershed side. So a couple of key things I wanted to highlight here. We do capture the user's name, and we include it in the xAPI statement. We have used the answered verb for all of our statements because we thought it was the most appropriate. We also have an interaction identifier, so every single interaction that the user has with Alexa, we coded it using some sort of letter, so A, B, C, D, E, etc. There's also a raw score included in there, which is, in our case, it's the number of quote-unquote correct or most appropriate responses that the user selected. And then finally, we have the actual raw text of the user's response. So in this particular case, you can see it says, I can't help you anymore, sorry. In terms of future improvements, two things that I would have liked to have included in here are the success and the completion flags, which I neglected to do that. So that was just an oversight on my part. But that being said, I think the next slide is just, moving on to the demo. So Brian, I will let you take over.
Thanks, Izzy. The tool we use, as Izzy mentioned, is a tool called VoiceFlow. It's a way to create Alexa and Google Home skills and kind of a fairly easy drag and drop sort of interaction. So there are lots of what are called blocks, which is what you're seeing on the screen here, that essentially tell Alexa or the device to do a number of tasks. So as Izzy mentioned, sort of the flow that happens is Alexa provides the answer as if they were the customer on the phone. And kind of a cool feature of this is that we can use different voices, so it's not just Alexa saying it. So we used a voice called Joey acting as the customer. And then Alexa provides the responses, the potential responses for the learner to respond. And then all of that information is captured. So once it's said, Alexa starts listening for any of those three responses that are given. What happens next is we set a number of variables, essentially the number of questions that were asked, the exact response that was given, and the number of correct responses along the way. So kind of a cool feature of VoiceFlow is there's a number of variables that can be captured locally. And then the cool thing about these as well is that it can be used, these variables can be used in our xAPI statements. The next block that happens after that is our API block, where we send our xAPI statement. Like I just mentioned, we can use some of those variables. So as you mentioned, the name of the learner that's captured at the beginning is sent with each of those responses along with their answer. And then from there, there's a number of branching sort of ways that the interaction can go. As you can see on the screen, there's lots of different lines that connect all of these things. Again, a fairly easy sort of drag and drop option that makes it possible to branch these scenarios. One cool feature that we use is a random walk. So each time a learner interacts with the skill, they won't follow the same flow each time. So sometimes Alexa will say yes to an answer, sometimes Alexa will say no to an answer. It gives an opportunity for the learner to try out a few different paths along the way. So I'll give you an idea, kind of a demo of how this works. I don't think you'll be able to hear the audio of Alexa and Joey speaking towards us, but on the right side of the screen you will be able to see the transcript of how it works. The nice thing about this testing feature as well is that you can type in your responses. So it makes it super easy to test that I don't actually have to be saying things each time. So as we started, ask for the username, and then provide the instructions of the interaction. So then audio file that the phone's ringing, Alexa gives the instructions and the possible responses to say. And so then the learner responds with the correct answer, or the answer that they think fits best. And then after each interaction, so now Alexa is essentially listening for the response, A, B, or C. And then there's a few different synonyms that can be added to that as well. So sometimes maybe the learner won't say exactly A, or they want to say the first one, or they want to say the second one, or the last one. You can build in those synonyms to go along the way. So when I respond A here, again, I will set some variables about that was my response, and then at the end send a statement. So the nice thing here is that, again, sort of random choices. Sometimes the customer will respond that it's not plugged in, the computer's not plugged in, and then there will be a different sort of set of responses that go along with that. And then what happened here is the customer did say it was plugged in, which is a different set of responses and sets the skill on a different path, which then continues on and on. Since you can't hear the audio, I'll go ahead and sort of stop here. All right, maybe we'll go to the end and see what the end looks like. So giving an incorrect response essentially ends the skill. Alexa provides an opportunity to say that they got 2 questions out of a possible 3 correct. Kind of someplace we'd like to go from this project at some point is to be able to give responses and provide a little bit more instruction after those at the end of the skill. So you got this one wrong, here's why. Build in some logic at the end of that. So that's essentially how the skill works. I'll pass it back to Izzy, who's going to talk just very briefly about, again, sort of what all of the xAPI statements look like on the back end.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I just wanted to show you real quickly that we are actually sending the statement. So just wanted to prove that to you guys so you can actually see the statement showing up. So you can see the interaction E answer in there. We captured Brian's name at the top. And then we have our raw score, a result of 2, which means that you got 2 of your answers correct. And then the actual response that you gave was, it should be working, we'll get someone over there quickly. That's it. So I don't know, does anyone have any questions? I've been answering questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to, you know, have anything else additional, please feel free.
That's awesome. Thank you, Izzy and Brian, for that demo. That was really, really awesome. And I love the voice flow tool that you showed us. So thank you for that resource. If there are no questions, I see that there's a question. What do you mean when you say correct or wrong answer? How do you determine that?
What we actually did at the very start was we built the entire flow with the 3 possible answers, and one of them was labeled, like we designated one of those 3 answers as the most appropriate response. So like at times the Alexa will give you the choice of, sorry, we'll get a representative over to you right away, which is usually inappropriate. That's incorrect. So usually you want to try to do a little bit more troubleshooting before you just go ahead and send somebody over. That's the idea. Yes, exactly. Luke said, the option that sex I can't help. Right. Exactly. You got it.
Awesome. Thank you, Team Alexa. We're moving right on to Team Dragon Stats. So J-Rock, if you want to go ahead and take over.
Absolutely, but before I begin, I would just like to say type a JJ in the chat if you guys appreciate what Jess has done this cohort. She had some big shoes to fill with Peter Gunther getting a new job, so really appreciate it, Jessica. Yeah, look at that chat, filling with the JJs. I hope you feel that love. All right, Team xAPI Dragon Stats. This one was a really conceptual one, but it kind of started as a joke, really. Like the first couple cohorts we had, there was a lot of talk in the chats about can we use xAPI to capture information about how people perform in Dungeons & Dragons. And I thought, well, I've got a bunch of Dungeons & Dragons fans. I'm just going to throw the channel up there and see what happens. And I got 3 amazing partners. But not really a whole lot of D&D players. So we had a lot to learn to do this. But could we pull data from a game that is almost totally played in the minds of its players? Could we measure the impact of a training on the performance of a new player who's never played before? And would they survive the rage of a maddened druid? These were the questions we started off with. Some of the questions came to us partway through, but you get it. So it started with different goals and pivots. A first thought we had was using RFID or near IR technology or hallway sensors to actually keep track of where the players were on a board, and then like track whether they moved towards the enemy, whether they moved towards cover, whether they moved, stay with their team, never split the party, that kind of thing. Quickly started realizing although some of that is possible, it was going to be way larger than the scope of this cohort to even scale up enough for me to be able to create anything like that. We had Anthony Altieri, and he's always doing something crazy cool. You guys got to check him out. He on LinkedIn Learning, he has a xAPI course, by the way, so I'll put a little plug in that for that. But David Jumeau had some interesting ideas. If you see the image on the bottom left corner about using JavaScript to create virtual environments that could capture some of those. And then Irina was our instructional designer, and she immediately started capturing all of our ideas and the things we were learning and building it into a mind map for creating the intervention, the e-learning portion. And we're not sure exactly. I mean, we're still working on all this stuff, whether it would just be straight up storyline course or whether it be like a storyline shell with little videos, instructional, that kind of thing. But this is kind of where we started because it is kind of a hard concept to get stuff that's just in your brain generating JSON statements into an LRS. So we tried to really boil it down and say, what would a first-time player really want to learn? Like, picture the scenario. You have never played before in your life, and you got invited to join a group of friends that have been playing together for a long time. And so we figured besides just learning the rules, a new player probably has 2 basic questions. How not to stink at playing with the team. How not to stink at playing my role. I see that, Chris. Hey, man, we might be able to use your DM your skills. We've got something we're going to need to run, and I don't know. Catch me later if you'd be willing to DM an adventure. But anyway, these are the 2 questions we decided to focus on. How can we capture what it's like to be a good player on the team, and how can we capture what it's like to not stink at your role? So we came up with 3 deliverables. We wanted an adventure, something that people could play in one sitting, ideally, but something that would be the same adventure time and again so that we could track the different performances of the different groups through the same context, right? It's always going to be a little difficult because you've got dice, and that throws randomness in there. So you can't necessarily do, you know, how many turns did it take them to beat the adventure or something, because there's certain amounts that are random by design. We wanted a tool to measure performance. That tool at first, and my first iteration was going to be the virtual board that was capturing all these things. But in role-playing games, there's like a dilemma that you have, right? Like you want to, as a DM, which for those uninitiated is the dungeon master, or the guy who a guy or gal who takes on the role of the game world itself. And then you've got the players who are like the main characters. And the DM's job is to react to them in such a way that they are in control of the story while filling in all the details they need. So you need an adventure, you need a tool to measure the performance. How do we know if someone's doing a good job or not? These games, these are, how do I put this? Picture like a video game where you have every button and you can do anything that your mind conceives of. So like they're meant to be wide open on purpose. So how do we measure that? And then finally, we wanted an intervention, an e-learning module, a video, something that will teach new players how to interact with the team, how to play well their role in the game. So the first thing was I got my my creative writer hat on, and I created an adventure called The Mad Druid's Rage. I don't know if that's a good name or not. I may have to rename it. But basically, it's a series of encounters that the players will go through, and each encounter is different enough that it can test the different type of things you might need to be good at. So I don't know, it's kind of tiny on my screen to read, but like that little green box text is like you read aloud. This is the first encounter, and basically the characters are, yeah, thanks David, I appreciate it. Yeah, I got the copyright. The characters start the adventure. You've been hired to escort this young lady to meet a wizard that she is going to become the apprentice of, and so that's how you kind of start. And as they come into town, they notice that this freak hailstorm is hitting just the town. Town hall is surrounded by wolves below and ravens above, and like all of the town watch's weapons are lying in the grass smoldering. And you see fearful eyes peering out of the windows at the wolves. So you start off right in the middle of things with combat, and you got to fight the wolves off. And that leads you on into the next adventure, or the next encounter in the adventure. And then this is kind of like the map. I want you to picture like a wizard's tower, but since my bad guy is a druid, he's got a huge tree. And so we've got different rooms going on as you fight your way into the tree, and you've got a puzzle room, you've got traps, there's a secret cave under the tree that's it's like an underground lake, and I was going to put an owl bear in there, but I'm pretty sure that that's like copyright of Wizards of the Coast, who owns Dungeons & Dragons, so maybe it'll just be a bear or a duck bear or whatever. But you get the idea. It's a fully fleshed out adventure that, oh yeah, I did do the graphics in PowerPoint because I'm very creative and also don't want to pay for higher order software. A bear duck, okay. So now I'm going to switch over to share the screen because I want to walk you through the intervention that I've created. And this is the idea for this is that this will be a tool that a reviewer would use to observe a player playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. So as per code for creating statements, I want to get the reviewer's name and email. I'm also going to get the player's name and email, and that's the player that they are observing to score on how well they perform. So there's David Jumeau at awesomeness.com is going to be the reviewer, and who's the player but Jonathan Rock, and get my email address in there, john at doofus.net. Those are not real email addresses, but I don't know if xAPI really cares if it's a real email address as long as it matches the ID standards, right? So this is created in Storyline, by the way. So first, we capture which class did they choose. I was really having a hard time deciding whether we should just open it up to everything or if we should pick classes that are easily buttoned down to a certain role. So we decided, at least for the first iteration, to just button it down to 4 roles, which are, well, I'll talk to you about that. Well, here, let me pause this so I don't get too rushed. The 4 roles are tank, which is basically the person that gathers all the attention, charges the enemy, and protects the rest of the players by having high armor, high hit points, and kind of absorbs the damage while the rest can fight. Then you've got a striker who maybe not as tough, but maybe can deal more damage. So the striker's role would be to shoot arrows from a safe distance. You got a healer whose job it is to make sure that the whole team stays alive. And you've got support, which may be like discovering traps or discovering magic, or like control, which is locking down a bunch of smaller enemies, or blinding the enemy or buffing the players, that kind of thing. So I think you guys get it. But this first one is table side. When it was John's turn, was he ready? Was he looking up rules? Was he on his phone? When he spoke dialogue, did he speak his dialogue in character? Did he interact with NPCs or PCs? These are all things you could be scored on to say, how fun are you to play with? Now we get to combat. Charge the enemy, there'd be your tank one. Stay with the group, there'd be your healer. Advantageous ground striker. So each one of these that you're choosing, you're increasing or decreasing the score for certain classes. And that can be compared with, okay, the class you chose is ideal for this role. How well did you play that role? And did you focus damage with the team or whoever was closest? Then we went to strategy. Number 1 rule in Dungeons & Dragons is don't split the party, because you can be picked off individually. Did you provide light for the team? Could the whole team not see? Did you save all your stuff for the boss or use it up on the first encounter? Did you understand your abilities or not? These are more things we're keeping track of. And then for the role. In overall, Jonathan Rock performed their role well, mixed in other roles, or was clueless. Jonathan Rock healed only others, healed only himself, healed neither. And these are 5. You can go in between only others and self if they healed both. Buffed allies, nerfed enemies, neither. There's your support class. Most of the damage was blank by Jonathan Rock. Absorbed, dealt, neither. So that is the app that we were picturing, and we can go back to the slides now if you like. Here, let me do yeah. So that's the app for someone to sit down with someone while they play a game and keep track of how they think they're doing. So it's really kind of subjective of the reviewer, why we wanted to capture the reviewer's credentials as well. But using the same information, you can track that game over game with the same player. So you could say, all right, here is the, here's the score they did the first time, and then we introduced the intervention. And then the second time they played, did they perform better on their subsequent adventure? Or you could also do some A/B testing here. I think I'm getting ahead of my slides here. A/B testing. This group of new players didn't get the intervention. They just played fresh. This group, we showed them the videos first and then had them play. See, was there a difference in performance of player based on the presence or absence of the intervention? We're still, putting the nuts and bolts together. I don't know if everybody would be up for doing this again next cohort, or if there's going to be another project that'll capture your attention. But we are at some point going to need teams to play the game and generate the data so we can start comparing it and see what we learn from it. Whoops, let me see. Did I go too far? Nope. All right, this is the team. I'm sure we had more people lurking, watching the little videos we record when we had meeting sessions. And also, Maggie McCumbee gave us some cool resources to start out, helping us noobs learn some of the ropes of Dungeons & Dragons. So I really appreciate this group coming together, trying something really weird to see. Because, that's the thing about xAPI, right? You should be able to capture statements from anything, not just necessarily an e-learning to an LMS, but real live happening in the world, and maybe even not even in this world, but happening in the world inside your head in Dungeons & Dragons. So any questions, guys? Thanks. I'm seeing some wows and some very cools. I appreciate it. I really appreciate everyone's willingness to go along on kind of a weird and maybe not necessarily super applicable to what we all do in our professional job, but I think perhaps. Perhaps. All right. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, J-Rock. Really informative. I learned a lot about Dungeons and Dragons just reviewing your slides. Had to ask some teammates for some support. We're going to move on to Team Interactive Video, which is Adrian and Steven. I'm going to switch the mode so that they can share their screens. So
Hi, can you hear me?
Feel free to go ahead and take over.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Adriani.
Yes, can hear you.
Oh, great. All right, so our Team Interactive Video, we wanted to create a video that had different decision points, and we wanted to track where the users kind of branched off to, what decisions they made, and collecting that type of data. So Stephen, who was on a cohort before, has been a wonderful resource on our team, and he created a project on his end that he shared some screenshots of with the group as to how to create the statements, how to send the statements, and he was able to successfully send statements to Watershed. On my end, I tried to follow his instructions, and I was successfully able to send a statement yesterday. I just have to clean up my statements a little bit. So Stephen is going to demo what he's created for us today, and I'll just pass it on to him. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So this is a little bit more applicable. And so I work for a continuing medical education office, and our module that we're creating right now is on handling difficult encounters in the ambulatory clinic setting. So we wanted to make an interactive video, a very simple one with 3 different branch decisions where the learners would get to a point, have to make a choice. Once they made the choice, if it was the wrong choice, they'd get a little bit of video and then would take them back to the right route. But at each one of those points, we wanted to capture that data. So we had the players in the video, and then they run through the scene. Here's where they would get to make the choice. So, you know, A, how can I help? Or B, so what's your problem? So I used 3 different, well, actually 4 different pieces of software. We used xAPI, Storyline 360, Rise, and Watershed. So xAPI was used to make the statements. So the first thing we did was, of course, we make the activity, and then we make the statements for the activity. On this, you can see the first step was doing your verb, which in this case was that they were going to answer a choice. Inside of Storyline, these were based on 3 variables. So as you had 2 choices, the variable would change based on the choice that you made. So in this case, for this statement, choice 1 was the variable inside Storyline. Then you went to edit the activity, so I've got our branch video, our description was choice 1 selection, and then question was the activity type. Then we published it once we had the code for the statements so we could get our publishing code. So the learning management system that I use, it doesn't work with xAPI, so I had to do it as a standalone course. And when I publish out of Storyline, there's a reason for that, because I'm not really publishing for an LMS. Since it's going into Rise, I'm doing it as a Review 360 publish. And here, right here is our key and secret and endpoints for Watershed. So this is what the statement's going to need to then send that data into Watershed. So inside of Storyline, whenever you publish it, you got to take that code and put it on the master slide level. So that first image right here is putting that main publishing code into the slide master level. And then those statement codes, the individual statement codes, go into the actual slide level in your project. So on here, you can kind of tell where when you select one of the choices, you know, you're going to change adjust variable choice 1 to value of, and I made it where it was the text of the choice. So the buttons had the text of what you would say to the patient. And so that text would then populate into that variable, and when it gets into Watershed, you would see that text for that choice. So here, on this part, I had a little bit of problem at first because whenever I made the choice, I went to the layer level to execute the video, and I put the JavaScript in the layer level, and that did not work. So I had to rethink my process and then figure it out, okay, it needs to be on the slide level. So what I did was after you made all the choices and it went to the next slide, then that's when it executed all three of the JavaScript statements to take that xAPI data into Watershed. So you have three statements for those three decision points that they had to make in the previous slide based on the choices. And so this is Watershed. This is the LRS that I used. We have the free version, so it doesn't do a lot of visualization, but you can get the data, which is great. So on this point, you have the name of the person. There's the verb right here, answered, and then the response, so what's your problem? So they made the wrong choice at that point, and we could tell that because that's the data we got back. And that's it. So yeah, so a couple of the things that I had to figure out was the putting the the JSON script into the right layer, and not the layers, but the slide level. Because when I was sending it through the layer level, I was getting no response. It was just a blank bracket, so there was no data there. But as soon as I was able to put it on the slide level, that information came through.
Awesome. Stephen, there's a few questions in the chat for you.
Oh, let me go back and look. So, yeah, so I took the storyline interaction. So when I published it out, I published it as a review 360, and then that got embedded into Rise as an interaction, a storyline interaction. One of the things that I didn't talk about was that whenever you, as a standalone course, whenever you get into that interaction within the Rise course, a pop-up happens where it asks for your email and then optional first and last name. So it has to get that identifier for the person, or it won't capture the statement. So if they cancel through, then there wouldn't be anything. But when you do the standalone course, since our LMS doesn't use the login ID for the LMS as the identifier, we had to go that route.
Awesome. If there are no other questions, we're going to see if Judy is on the line on the session
Judy
for Team Pebl.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I'm not in the presenter thing, so I don't think I have control over stuff.
Right. Judy,
but,
what did you, hold on one second. What is your name in the chat? I can add you as a presenter.
Kristen Hayden's Zofty down there.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm going to make you a presenter now, and then you'll be able to control your slides. There you go.
I'm going to share my screen a bit. Okay. So we worked, Team Pebl, worked on sending xAPI statements from interactive ebooks. So we were working with an open source tool called Pebl, and that was created, it's actually being developed currently. They're working with ADL. Judy's actually not on because she's working on a trial with it right now. But our goal was basically to take a document, any sort of book. We were thinking employee handbooks, guidebooks, long, boring manuals, and then add in opportunities for user interaction, and then track those interactions in the book using xAPI to get useful data out of how someone is reading a book, usually not something that's a data-filled experience. So what we did was we started with Pebl, which is the tool that we use to develop this. Pebl is a tool that's being developed that I have some notes from Judy because Judy knows a lot more about it. It is built to be really driven by learning science. It breaks down authoring tools to kind of the basic level and just supports things that support learning. It has some social features. It has discussion questions, social discussion opportunities. There's an Ask the Expert feature that I think might not be in all of them, but it can be. Adaptive features to personalize the content based on user choices or what you know about a user. And then it's that keeps students in their zone of proximal development if you are a ZPD fan. And it's built on web technology, so it's mobile friendly. It's all very responsive, truly actually responsive. It's text-based and image-based primarily, so you have the same experience on a mobile device as a tablet. It just reflects whatever you're using. And it is funded by ADL, so it is open source, which is one of our favorite things about it. J-Rock will like that as someone who just wants to leverage free or low-cost resources to do anything he does. And Judy also said she apologizes for not being here. She's actually running an efficacy trial at a military base right now. So the development right now is code-based. So they are working on an authoring tool, but they don't have it yet. So we were working with a code base, which was fun for those of us who are familiar with HTML and don't get an opportunity to use it because authoring tools came around. So this is basically what our development looked like. Our goal was and is still to set up a Pebl book that teaches people how to use Pebl and then tracks their interactions with the book so we can then look at the book that they submit at the end of it and see if it's good, and then track their interactions through the course to see if they maybe missed some things that would make it better, or they went through everything and still it was not good, or they didn't even read the book and they made a perfect Pebl book. So all those things you want to know when you're developing training that you can't always find out. This is something that's especially useful for things like employee handbooks. Maybe you have an HR incident and you want to go back and say, yeah, this person saw this part of the book, but when they did the quiz about how to not harass people, they actually picked the worst possible answers and they got the feedback that they shouldn't do that, and that just has a little bit of an extra trail there. So the development is that's exactly why I looked at this and said, oh, this is amazing. So the output of it, this is the iBook version. There's also an actual Pebl reader that I can share my screen in a second and get over to you. But I have like 100 screens up, so I have no idea where it is at this point. So it ends up being an ebook, and you can do things like click on pro tip, and a pro tip pops out. All of these things that you're used to from authoring tools, but in an ebook format. But then the xAPI transmits as this is the current state, and this is actually something we'll also look at. They hit page next. They hid something. Here we have they selected an option. They experienced a page. They responded to a data entry. All of this stuff happens as they go through the ebook. So you get these kinds of facts and records of their experience. So I'm going to go back to chat for a second because David asked, would a document generated play the Kindle and send the xAPI statements over? Yes, so if you have this Pebl enhanced ebook, it has an xAPI wrapper in it, and in this case the Pebl player has that wrapper in it, and it transmits those xAPI statements automatically. The Pebl wrapper asks for a name as you get into it, and that way it has the actor, and then the verbs and the objects flow from there. And I think this is there's some work on Pebl is ongoing, but I want to talk a little bit more about what we actually ended up doing in this because it was pretty interesting. Okay, so I just got the okay that I can share this document. So what we really ended up doing here, in large part, was taking the, I'm going to pull this up before I switch my screen over. We ended up looking at at the verbs that Pebl was currently providing, and then taking those verbs and deciding what would be more useful. So let me see if I have that document. So where did my slides go? Where the verbs were things like experienced or selected, we wanted things that were more like showed and hid. Let me find, sorry, I wasn't sure if I was allowed to show this one, so let me grab it. Actually, if you have the link to it, Cassandra, if you can throw that over to me real fast. I don't have it in my thing, but I'm going to share my screen again. Oh, well, there's the verbs. So one of the things that you can do is show and hide content. So if you have that, I don't remember what it had in there, but it wasn't intuitive. So we looked at all of the things that Pebl can do and the verbs that would throw, and then we picked the verb that we would expect to see as users of this. So things like they responded to a discussion question, we wanted that they responded, and we also wanted in the context of that statement what they responded. That way we can query that later for different words and things that we wanted to find out. So that ended up being a surprisingly big part of our work on this project. So it was less creating the book and getting those statements and more defining what those statements might look like, which was really valuable for us as people who wanted to learn more about what xAPI statements should look like and what we wanted them to look like, and if we were going to use this, what we might want to get out of it. So eventually there will probably be a Pebl vocabulary defined through the regular vocabulary list, and that was a big part of this. The other part, and this is where I will share my screen again. Oh, thank you for answering that, Cassandra. Okay, I want to share my screen now. And I'm going to do this way. So the reader that, there it is. Okay, you guys should be able to see the reader here. So this is the Pebl book in the reader itself. Hopefully you guys can see it. Jess, can you confirm?
I don't see anything. I see a graphic, but I don't see.
Oh,
yeah, it's just a pleasant sign.
Okay. That is my Mac trying to protect me from you guys. Hold on.
Peacock tail eyes. That's a good way to describe that, J-Rock.
What is it?
There it is. Well, now I see your Google Drive.
Perfect. Oh, that's the different thing, but that's okay. Oops. Oh, goodness. Okay. So you see, now do you see?
Now We see table of contents, getting started with Pebl extensions.
Do you have the Pebl book now? Okay,
Yep.
Perfect. I have two screens, so this is especially interesting. Okay, so you have the Pebl book here. You have the table of contents. That would, when I click on that, reflect in the LRF. I clicked on that link. And then I know, I skipped right to chapter 12, and that's the chapter about expense reports, and I missed all of the chapters about how to actually act on travel. So then you go next, you go to the Pebl book, and here's where you have the interaction. So this is the show hide I was talking about. You click on it, and it shows more information. You click off of it. This we recommended that the verb would be, instead of what it originally was, which was not that intuitive, showed and hid. And so we can say they showed the piece of the ebook with that ID, maybe it's Pebl Demo Pro Tip, and hid Pebl Demo Pro Tip. So that's a lot of the work that we did, and then we put this together, which we're probably going to continue through the next one, so let us know if this is something that kind of speaks to you as something you'd like to learn more about. The other thing, and this is where it really has an impact, the data you get about what people actually saw. So here, if I just read it this way, how to optimize your book, I might not get the information I need to actually install Pebl extensions in the book. Instead, I would say PC, and then get the actual information for what you would need for a PC. If I went to Mac, you would get different instructions on how to install it for a Mac, because ebooks are more complicated on Macs, as I went through this. So that's essentially the Team Pebl demo. We still have a little bit more work that we're working on, but essentially that is what we worked on this time. And I've lost Adobe Connect, I believe, so you might have to get rid of my screen for me, Jeff. Oh, there it is.
Awesome.
And because I wasn't on there, I'm going to just double check the chat real fast. And let me know if you have any questions.
There are questions about how it works on a mobile device, Kristen. Can you speak to that?
So it's because it's text-based, it would just be, you might only see step 1 on the screen, but it'll respond. It's fully responsive. So it just flows as much text in as can fit on that screen. And Chris, that's the nuts and bolts are very nutty and bolty at this point because it is just a code base. So if I go back to here, let Judy know if you want to be part of shaping the actual authoring tool portion of it, because you really do need to understand how to work with a code base to use it currently, but they are working on an authoring tool. And yes, so David, you can do interactions like discussion questions, that content morphing thing where I picked the Windows or Mac version. It's called a content morphing extension. And yeah, Cassandra just put those extensions, that link in. That lists all the extensions they currently have. But content morphing is a really, really powerful one, and that's where you would get a lot of the interaction that personalizes information. So if you say you have employee handbook, that's always the example that I go back to in my head with this, and you have someone who is never going to travel. So you have a question at the start of the handbook that says, what percentage of the time will you travel? And they say 0%. Anytime you get to content that's about travel, you can just leave it out or put a note saying, hey, if you ever travel, let us know, but this content is about travel, so just skip it. That kind of contextualizing is something that the content morphing tool would allow you to do. And Cassandra, you can jump in or throw in chat if there's anything else that you thought of as you were doing this that it would be good for. And then, oh yeah, they're downloadable when they connect to Wi-Fi, like Cassandra said, it'll send. Okay, so David. So I would say clicking, I understand the terms and conditions. Yes. I don't know if you could do a full-fledged JavaScript 8-minute. I'll let Judy answer that. But it's right now the extensions are, they go from discussion questions. There are link hooks. There are low-stakes multiple choice questions. One important thing about that, though, is that they are low-stakes multiple choice questions. So it gives you the feedback for that question block, that one question. It's not keeping a running total throughout the book. So you wouldn't be able to use this as a full-fledged assessment. You would need to use a different assessment tool for that. You could probably use that and then embed the questions question by question in there, but that's an important thing to know. They also have a lot of image-based extensions like figures and image carousels, and then there's data entry, and that's where I think you could do things like clicking I understand the terms and conditions. That's, yeah, you have to take anti-bribery e-learning, and yeah. So it's for things like that compliance training. I think it's really useful just to contextualize the information that you get and to sign off that someone actually looked at each part of this and how they responded on questions. And it's also a really, this might be a hot take from Kristen here, but the end goal of compliance training from the instructional designer's perspective shouldn't be making the prettiest and fanciest compliance training we can. If you have it as an ebook that's trackable, you don't have to add all of this stuff to it to make it prettier. You can just keep it at the basics. And I think the reason I was drawn to this is because you can just kind of leave things at the basic and not pretend that it's this fancy thing full of stock photos that you found. So that's my little soapbox on it. But let me know if you have any ongoing questions. You can also hop on our Slack channel. It is Team Pebl, as you may guess. And thank you for listening to us today.
Awesome. Thank you for this presentation, Kristen. Our next team is with Brian, Team Captivate, JF Library.
Hey, everybody. Let me get my screen share going here, and we'll get onto it straight away. Okay, first of all, let me start by saying I won't be able to see anything you guys are putting in chat because I'm going to be bouncing around screens, so I'll answer any questions at the end, so I'm not ignoring you if you don't hear from me. So let's jump right into it by starting a project created in Captivate using this wrapper. So you notice something flashed up for a half a second there, and basically what it said is, do we know who this person is entering this project? In this case, we don't. So we're going to ask them for an email name. Now, a couple of things about this. This is designed for Captivate projects that are being hosted on a server, Captivate projects that are being hosted on an LMS. It really shouldn't matter where you're coming from, but maybe or maybe not the username is available. So like in an LMS, for example, the SCORM object has who the user is. So the first thing this wrapper does is looks for the SCORM object. Says, does it exist? If it exists, is there a user in there? If it is, let's pass that in and start the presentation. If not, though, let's take them to this screen so we can capture that information. So I'm going to just create a new user, and we'll call ourselves xAPI guy. And I'm going to use JRock's domain at doofus.net, and we'll submit that email. Okay, now we're starting the project. If you take a look at what happened up here, if you look at the link, all it really did was moved our email that we just put in up into an email parameter up in the link. That's where it's looking for it for. So why is that important to you? Well, if you wanted to email a project directly to somebody with a link, you could append their email address to it, and then they can skip past having to enter it themselves or putting it in wrong. I know there's some cases in our organization where we're able to look up using our Active Directory a person's email address and append it right into a link. So there's a lot of different use cases for getting email that way. So let's back up a little bit and talk about the Project Catalyst. How come? Right? So at my real job, we had a heavier consumption of Captivate authored content, and we're using xAPI very heavily in a homegrown app that we have that also has content. But part of the content that was inside of that was now being authored by Captivate. So our app was capturing things like they're launching this particular piece of learning, but once users started interacting with it, that really all started to get lost. So then I started looking at Captivate as a whole and said, what can Captivate do? And you may remember one of our first weeks, they took us through that. I think it was Sean Putnam. And part of the problem is Captivate will put out xAPI, but it's difficult. It's difficult to hook up. It's not very intuitive. And the xAPI that it's producing is very SCORMy. So it's really just taking SCORM statements and turning them into xAPI. I thought we could do better than that. So I had a couple of requirements as I went along. One was, as I was creating these Captivate packages and kind of figured it out, I found myself custom coding each one. So every time we had to publish, an hour or two, I think my longest one was about 7 hours worth of coding went into making it work and report all the stuff that we wanted to. Not a very sustainable model. The next requirement was really using xAPI to its full ability. So, we're all great with actor verb activity, but really the magic in xAPI starts to come in context. What's the parent? Is there multiple parents? What's the CMI information? What are the results? What are those types of things? So really wanted to make sure like we pushed ourselves to incorporate all of that. And then the third requirement is not everybody's a coder. Very few people are coders. So this had to be a solution that I could teach to my learning designers. It's something that they could do pretty easily without a whole lot of code knowledge, a little bit of training. So 10 minutes or less was my goal. The next thing I'll talk about is just real quick, I'm going to use a little bit of jargon here, and there's nothing worse than when you start hearing jargon and you have no idea what it means. So let's look at Captivate itself, simply an authoring tool for e-learning. That's all Captivate is. And really all Captivate is putting out is a package that's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the language of the web. If you don't know the language of the web, here's an easy breakdown. HTML is what's on the page, CSS is how it looks on the page, and JavaScript is the code or how it interacts with you. If you type something in or click on something, JavaScript is what tells it how to do that. So Captivate is just creating these packages. Another term you hear a lot with code is this term library. So a library is just a collection of code that coexists with other code and does the heavy lifting. So in our case, the Captivate library is code that's embedded in Captivate, and it does all the heavy lifting for the xAPI legwork. A little bit more jargon, you're going to hear me talk about Captivate APIs. So an API, we have again talked about that, but Captivate has a set of predefined ways to use JavaScript to get information out of Captivate. Who's my learner? What score did they get? What slide are they on right now? Also to give information back to Captivate. Here's your learner. Here's what slide I want you to go to next. Those things can all be accomplished with an API. The other thing you'll hear me reference is Super Wrapper. I kind of use that interchangeably with Captivate JavaScript library. The reason why is, well, first of all, Captivate JavaScript library really doesn't flow off the tongue. Second of all is it's really a family that I'm hoping to create of code connectors for things like Captivate. I know I've heard Articulate doesn't do a particularly good job. Lectora doesn't do a particularly good job. So maybe if this is successful, Super Wrapper can branch out into some of those other authoring tools that are out there. Okay, now let's hop into some fun stuff. Let's do some demos and see what we've really got going on here. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is navigation verbs. Accessed, entered, viewed, returned, focused, all that kind of stuff. So let me hop into this, and I'm just to show you what's going on here. You see a timer ticking down, and I just want to let you know that in the Captivate, we titled this slide Navigation Verb Explanation. I've got about 3 more seconds, and I'm going to get this button and try to advance right there. Okay, why is that important? Well, let's move over to the LRS and see what's going on here. Sorry, got logged out in the waiting. Okay, so you can see xAPI guy. There I am. You know, we put in at doofus.net. But let's go all the way back until we see xAPI's first statement. Shoot, and I forgot to change back my demo. This is supposed to say access, but I'm going to show you the flexibility later. And I was going to change it to a nonsense word, wumbode, and during my demo, I never changed my demo back. So I'll fix that. Or talk more about that later. But let's go look for that slide that we just were at, that slide navigation. So here we are, and there's two different verbs that came up for that. There's entered the slide, because we know when the user entered it, but we don't know anything about what he did on that slide. So you get an entered verb. You also get this viewed verb. What I want to show you here, and I know again xAPI can be tough to look at, but if we scroll down, remember I waited specifically 15 seconds before we advanced. We had that little countdown. Well, you can see now that I've viewed it, we're passing in how much time I've spent on that slide. So Captivate just listened, said, hey, you advanced to the next slide. You were on the last one for 15 seconds. I'm going to put all that into an xAPI statement and send it off to the LRS. Some other verbs that you're going to see around the way is unfocused. So how did we get this unfocused verb? Well, I had to leave the Captivate presentation to come into the LRS, which is very common in learning, at least the way I learn. I don't know about you guys, but you were talking about compliance training. Can't tell you how many times I've hit play on the video, and then I've run off and checked some emails or Googled up what the latest news is, or I advance to the next slide and come back. But, you know, I'm not really learning there. I'm just going through the motions, and that's what a lot of our learners are doing. Wouldn't it be really interesting if we knew that? So let's take these one step further now. Let's do some context with them and actually put them into some reporting that might be meaningful. So take a look here. This is the training, and again, it should say access, but because I changed our verb to wumbode, I'm not coming up as having ever accessed this course, presenter error. But you can see how many times we accessed it. Course completion, that verb, Brian completed the course, fires when you get to the very last slide. But have a look at this, unfocused time. So this is how much time I've spent as a user unfocused in this particular presentation. Makes sense because I'm doing a lot of debugging, so I'm constantly switching back and forth between the LRS, and each time that's accumulating my unfocused time. xAPI guy has been unfocused for 4 minutes and 36 seconds already on that thing. So you can kind of see how that's playing out. But then you may want to know, well, what slides are they unfocusing on? And now you can see, so this is here's that same slide again, navigation verb explanation that we just came from. We were on, the average user sits on that slide for 2 minutes and 46 seconds. It's been entered, or 9 different times people have gone into that slide, and of that, 35 seconds of that time has been unfocused time. So really you can see how it starts to play over. So those are some navigation verbs. So we took a look at the statements, at the dashboard. Let's run back and look at some more verbs. Now, what about video? Big part of e-learning today, right? So let's hop off to this slide that has video in there. And I'm just going to queue up. I've got 3 different videos, and I'm just going to spin these up and let them run. I'm going to take this one. I'm going to pause him. I'm going to scrub him down. I'll take this one, and I'll pause him and hit the mute button here. And this one made it all the way to the end because it's a short video. So now let's run back to the LRS again and see what we got coming in. Okay, now you can see all of those different things came in, muted, paused, played, scrubbed. So that's great, but again, it's just raw data. How is that helpful to us? Well, let's turn it into some reporting that now becomes helpful. So let's look at our video interaction that we have. Here's the 3 different videos that we were just using. And I apologize. There we go. The 3 different videos we were just using, so this many times I've actually hit the play button on those videos. This is how many times I've paused it. This is how many times I've scrubbed it. So how would I use this if I was evaluating my learning? Well, if I've got 9 videos that were paused, or 9 times this video was played, of those 9 times, 17 times they paused it and 11 times they scrubbed it. Why are they scrubbing? Are they scrubbing to the end to skip over it? Is there a concept in it that's too hard for them to understand, so they're scrubbing back to revisit that concept? Well, we can take it one step further, and let's take a look at this report that shows, am I scrubbing forward or am I scrubbing backwards? So here we go. This is a measures report. So you can see this one has got 5 seconds. This add init and variables, it's been scrubbed for 5 seconds, between 6 seconds and 11 seconds forward. Not very long time, but this published video, this was actually where I was working trying to make all of this work. So I back scrubbed this a whole bunch of times. But you can see for a total of, it's actually 42 minutes is the delta between those. So 42 minutes worth of back scrubbing happened in the published video. That could be really useful to know with our learners if they're back scrubbing, what points are they back scrubbing to? And is there some consistency there where maybe we need to enhance our video or enhance what's happening in learning? Okay, that's video. Oh, and I must have double clicked there. The last part of it that's important is quizzing, and Captivate has some nice quizzing features built into it. So let's look at how that all comes together. So which of these is not part of an xAPI statement? We know an adjective is not, so we're going to submit that. I double-clicked again. An LRS both hosts content and receives statements. Well, it does receive statements, but no LRSs that I'm aware of actually host content as well, so we're going to say false there. And I'm sure some of you will say, well, what about an LMS that records LRS statements? I got you. And then the final one here, third question, is just a sequence question, which is what order were these introduced? So if we want to put it in the right order, SCORM 1.2 was first, then 2004, and then finally xAPI. And now we get to the end of our quiz where we have the review and we get our score. So we got 100%, but what's that look like on the back side? So going back to our LRS again, one of the nice things about CMI5 input, and every question has its own right kind of CMI5 within this. So if it's matching, if it's drag and drop, if it's true and false, the appropriate xAPI CMI5 profile has been used for each one of those. And I didn't really even know how powerful that was going to be, coupling it with Watershed. I'll show you that in a minute. But you can see what you correctly answered, incorrectly answered, and then you're still getting the viewed and enter slide for each of those quizzes as well. So you can see how much time did they spend on that quiz slide before they answered that question. So let me go back to the data now, or the reporting, and let's look at a few reports we were able to spit out with this. So quiz responses at a glance. If I open this up, this has all 3 quiz questions in there, and every time that I've generated any data for this, it has populated. And here we go. So we can see here's the 3 questions we just answered. 5 times that question's been answered correctly, 4 times incorrectly, and only 2 for here. And we got a nice little pie chart. Again, you put out learning, you think it's good. It's a great way you can look at a pie chart and say, man, I'm at like 50%. That's not even passing. Either my learning sucks or my question sucks or a combination of the both, and make those adjustments really quickly by just glancing at a quick report. Here's the one that really kind of knocked my socks off with Watershed. I had no idea. I just put together an activity report. Everything that's in here is only because we gave it the right xAPI. Everything else, Watershed did intuitively. So you can see all of the different people who have taken that quiz, what their first score was, what their last score was, what their best score was. You can continue down and get what range did the average person fall into. You can keep on going and get, if they didn't answer it correctly, what were the other responders answering with? Well, 9% said B, 18% said C, but 73% got the correct answer, which was D. So all this information was in here, and I had no idea. Like I said, all I did was said, this is the parent of the quiz. What you got? What do you have, Watershed? And this is what was spit out on the other side. So that is the presentation in a nutshell, but there are a couple more things that I want to show you before I open it up to questions. And one is, this is great, but what if my organization doesn't use accessed or started or any of the verb choices that you've made? And I really did match our verb choices up with the way we use verbs with our other xAPI, but I understand that might not be everybody's profile. So let me do this. This is the code piece. All you have to know about this is you're putting this file into the Captivate file, and there's just a little bit more that you have to do, and it works from there. There's 1,200 lines of code about that makes this work, and I know it's overwhelming. I don't really want you to look at any of that or care about any of that. The only thing I want you to look at is this parameters object right here and show you how we can change things. So remember where I said it was supposed to say access and I changed it to OneBode? That's why we saw OneBode in the LRS, is because I changed it to that here. So let's pick another nonsense word. Again, we'll stay with JRock, and instead of for accessing, we're actually doofusing content. So we're going to doofus the material. So doofus the material, and we'll change the verb to doofus. All right, and now I'll go back to the presentation here, hit refresh. Okay, so we've restarted again now, and now let's take a look at that in the LRS. And there we go. We can see xAPI guy now doofused Super Rapid Cohort demo. And it not only changed that, but it also changed our activity ID. So you can really, as long as the different actions here are matching up with what your vernacular is within your company, you can change that. There's other things in here too, like for if you want to play around with this and you want to do a little bit of testing or see what's going on, there's this console log thing here. So again, I don't want to go too codey on anybody, but for any of you that really want to see what's happening as it's happening with the code, you can open up the console. So I'm on Mac, and a Command Option J is how you do that. And look at some of the stuff that it's telling us. It's the version of Super Wrapper. This is just a warning message because I check all the IRIs before I'll let you put them in, and if you try to pass in a bad one, not knowing what you're doing, it won't break anything. It just won't use your IRI. But now here's each one of those statements, and it's telling me that it's being sent to statement save. And here's the actual statement. So I can drill in and look at any of the LRS that's being sent. So this one was doofused, right? Because this should be our first one, so it's access. When I drill this down, you can see that's what it is. It's doofused is our display name, and then our content activity ID. One last thing is, I know I've gone through a ton, and I can't wait to answer some questions for you all if you have them. But again, I understand dealing with this and going through the few steps it takes to set it up is still a bigger barrier to entry than a lot of people want to do. So long-term state is I'm creating an Electron desktop app, and this is just very basic. Please don't critique my design or what I've got going on here, other than to just give you a quick demo. What you'll eventually be able to do is just choose your Captivate package once it publishes out of Captivate, and then from there, you'll be able to go to Super Wrapper parameters and change any of these things that you want to. Right now, it's looking at that object that's embedded and giving you all of those values. So if we wanted to go into verbs, you can see I had it set at OneBode, so OneBode is in there right now, but you'll be able to change that. So if we wanted to change it to JRock's doofus, we could do that and then just go back to the menu and set all of these parameters that you're having to set inside of code using a UI. And then we can decide what verbs we want to use. Like maybe that focus on focus, maybe you're sending your users away to go to the internet. So that's going to generate a lot of statements while they're switching between screens, and that's not really what you want. You don't care about it in this content. So you could just turn those verbs off or set them to false in this object. That would be the equivalent of finding focused and unfocused here, and just changing this first value to false, and then it won't use it. So long-term goal is I'm hoping by the end of the next cohort to have this completely done, so anybody that wants to use Captivate can. I'll also say from an LMS standpoint, it works. I've had great success on StormCloud and Cornerstone. So far it looks like Canvas and SuccessFactors is giving us a little bit of guffaw using it, but I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper with those users after cohort here and see what we can learn. So thank you all so much for that time. I'm sure it was a fire hose and whirlwind of information, but willing to take any questions or anything you got.
Hey, Brian, I put two questions.
Let's see. Go ahead.
Are we able to access reports like these using the free trial of Watershed? Is there something similar to these reports available in StormCloud?
There's not something similar in StormCloud that I'm aware of, and the license that you guys are seeing that I'm using in Watershed is my cohort license. So yes, you're able to create all of those reports with the cohort license that's given to us because it's a full CLO access. One thing you will notice, or I notice, you may see me being impatient. Watershed throttles free access accounts, so they don't load nearly as quickly as my production account does. But that's really the only drawback. So yes, you can do all that stuff.
Can you remind me of Captivates Limitation out of the box in contrast with this library?
Sure. So Captivates Limitation out of the box is, first of all, hooking it up to the LRS is challenging. So allegedly, you just set a parameter file and check a few settings. I'm a pretty tech-savvy guy, and I couldn't figure it out. So just getting connected to the LRS seemed to be a challenge. And then from there, all that's available to you is normal SCORM stuff. So whatever your LMS can tell you, and if someone started an activity, someone stopped an activity, someone got a 98%, that's about all the information that you're going to get into an LMS. Where here, this is true, activity information on the slide. We can track click boxes. We can, if you've got a menu-driven slide where you're constantly going back to it, you can make the verb that it shows return to menu slide rather than entered slide, because you're really returning back to it. So all of these little nuances about how your user is using it, you can never capture that with Captivate out of the box.
And final question that I've seen from the chat is, what about some custom quizzes or knowledge?
Absolutely. Those, I mean, being created in Captivate, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but each one of those knowledge checks that were in there are custom quizzes using the Captivate quizzing object. So as long as they're one of the 12 types of questions that Captivate offers you, the CMI5 is there for all of them. The only drawback that I've found so far is you have to be careful to use it the way that it outputs it. In other words, it puts in a title, it puts in the name of the question, it might put in columns for matching. If you delete any of that, unfortunately, Captivate doesn't have an API that says, hey, tell me what the quiz question is on the page, on this page. So the way that I did quizzing is some real coding magic. I'm slicing apart the HTML output and saying what lives in this position, and that should be the title of the slide. But if you deleted the title of the slide, it changes all of those positions. So some of your xAPI on the backside might get a little bit, a little screwy.
Awesome job, Brian. Everyone is cheering you on in the chat. If there are no more questions for Brian.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, David asked another question. So if you did some modifications on the quiz, there should be a refresh, question mark.
So if you did, it depends what your modifications were. Actually, can you give me screen share back, Jess? I can show you. It's easier than I can tell you. Okay, so I have this Captivate package open, so let's take a look at those couple of quiz items that I had, right? So here is what generated that quiz question. If I wanted to change this, let's change this to noun. No, you wouldn't have to do any refresh or, other than republishing the Captivate, of course. But everything else, it's listening to what you're doing. What you would have to be more concerned about is if you took up here and you deleted this, because now there's nothing sitting in that position, and when it slices and dices your slide, it's looking for a title. So now it's going to take this as the title, and your answers, everything's going to move out of sequence, because it's the only way I could pull the quiz questions out of Captivate that I've been able to find. If any of you know of a better way, I've sliced and diced the Captivate object that it outputs upside and down, and unfortunately Captivate doesn't put that anywhere in their data that I've been able to find. So that's how that works. One other thing I can show you, just since I've got this open, a lot of people know, so I said it's hard to connect to the LRS. How do you connect to the LRS in Captivate? Here's what you have to do. You just go into variables, and you set up your 3 variables right here: production endpoint, production key, production secret. The only other thing you have to do differently in Captivate to make this work is on your first slide in properties. Why is my properties up? Oh, here, it's just off screen, I believe. Sorry, something's going on with screen share. But anyways, in advanced action, sorry, I can't seem to get to it. Oh, there, now it's coming over. let's see. Oh, and now I didn't show properties. Window properties. Okay, sorry about that. So right here, the only thing you have to do is in the script window, type in a init. That's what calls super wrapper and makes it work. And the rest kind of goes from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for all of the teams who presented today. That was very informative, and I'm going to switch back. I just have a few announcements for Cohort, and then we'll wrap up this semester. So as you all know, or maybe you don't, the xAPI party is Friday, December 13th in Chelsea, Michigan, and online. There are multiple tracks, and there are 5 to 10 time slots per track. So for the online track, there are 5 to 10 time slots. So it can be anywhere from 22 to 45 minutes per presentation, which includes some time for Q&A. So if any of your teams are interested in presenting at the party, whether you're presenting online or in person, please let me know. You can send me a message on Slack, or you can email me at jjackson@torrancelearning.com. I have one team signed up thus far. If you're interested in what a mock-up agenda would look like, I'm putting it in the chat now. You can click that link and go and see the agenda from last year. We're still working on the agenda for this year. This one is from May of last semester. And then lastly, if you're getting a day off work and your employer is like, you're going to a party, we can share information about the event's conference nature so that your employer doesn't give you many obstacles. But again, please sign up, please sign up and let me know via Slack or on email, and then I'll send you a link to upload your slides. That's it. Y'all did an amazing job this cohort. Keep going. Sign up for Cohort in the spring. Sign up for the party to do some demos and participate in the makerspace. And if you have any questions, email me or Slack me. Have an awesome Thursday, you all.